He said it the way you'd tell someone the dishwasher needs emptying. Calm, matter of fact, like it wasn't my name on the deed. My son stood in the middle of my kitchen, the kitchen I had painted 3 times over 30 years, where I'd made his birthday cakes, where his father had his last cup of coffee before the hospital, and he told me I had until the end of the month. Sign the house over as collateral, his wife's debt, $280,000, or find somewhere else to live. I didn't say anything right away. I had learned, somewhere in my 63 years, that silence is not weakness, it is information gathering. So I stood there by the counter, with my hands wrapped around my coffee mug, and I looked at my son, really looked at him, and I tried to find the boy I raised somewhere behind his eyes. I'm not sure I did. His name is Colin. He's 41 years old. He has my late husband Gerald's jaw and his grandmother's stubbornness, and apparently, somewhere along the way, he also picked up his wife's talent for treating people like pieces on a board. Her name is Shawna. I want to be fair when I talk about Shawna. I want to be the kind of woman who is fair. But fairness requires truth, and the truth is that I knew something was wrong with her the first Thanksgiving she came to this house and rearranged my refrigerator while I was saying grace. I didn't say anything then either. That was 5 years ago. I wish I had. Gerald passed in the spring of 2019. Pancreatic cancer. 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. We didn't have time to do much except hold hands and say the things that needed saying. He told me to keep the house. He said it more than once. Eleanor, keep the house. It's yours. Don't let anyone talk you out of it. I thought he was being sentimental. I didn't understand yet that he was being practical. The house is in Clarksville, Tennessee. 3 bedrooms, a sunroom that gets good light in the mornings, a yard that Gerald used to mow every Saturday whether it needed it or not. We paid it off in 2011. After he died, it was mine free and clear, worth somewhere around $340,000 at last appraisal. Colin moved back in 8 months after Gerald passed. He said he was worried about me. I believed him. I was lonely and the house was too quiet. And when he carried his boxes through the front door, I cried a little, not from sadness, but from relief. I thought, good, the house is alive again. I should have asked more questions. Shawna moved in 3 months later. Colin said it was temporary. They were looking for a place. The market was impossible. It would only be a few weeks. I gave them the larger guest room. I moved my sewing things out of the closet. I stocked the bathroom with products I thought she might use. She never said thank you. Not once. Not for the room. Not for the meals. Not for the years. I told myself she was the type of person who showed gratitude differently. I told myself a lot of things. What I didn't know then, what I had no way of knowing, was that Shawna had come into this marriage carrying a debt that had nothing to do with anything as straightforward as a mortgage or a car loan. She had spent 3 years as a partner in what her former business associates called a real estate investment group. What the Tennessee Secretary of State eventually called it was something else entirely. By the time the letters started arriving, from attorneys, from creditors, from people I had never heard of, the number attached to her name was $280,000. Colin knew before I did. I found that out later. For a while, life in the house settled into something I tried to convince myself was normal. Shawna worked from the dining room, which meant I ate my lunches on the sunroom porch. Colin handled the grocery runs but stopped asking what I needed. Small things, the kind of things you can almost talk yourself out of noticing. Then Shawna started making suggestions. At first, they seemed innocent enough. The living room furniture was dated. The curtains in the entryway blocked light. Did I really need both guest rooms since I never had guests? I had guests. My sister Paulette visited twice a year from Louisville. My friend Gwendolyn came every October. I told Shawna this. She smiled the way people smile when they've already stopped listening. One afternoon, I came home from my book club to find that the sunroom had been rearranged. My plants, I have had an African violet on that windowsill since 1997, were on the floor. A standing desk had taken the place of my reading chair. When I asked Shawna about it, she said she needed better light for her work calls. She said it was absolute confidence, as if she were telling me something I already knew and had agreed to. I moved my chair back. The next day was in the same corner again. I said nothing. I was still in the business of keeping the peace. The peace cost me more than I knew. By the following spring, I had stopped going into my own dining room. I had stopped using the kitchen after 7 in the evening because Shawna liked to do her work calls in there, and the light was better. I had retreated inch by inch into approximately half of a house that had my name on the title. The morning Colin gave me the ultimatum, I had made coffee and sat down at the kitchen table at 6:15, the way I have done every day for 30 years. Shawna came in at 6:40, saw me there and said nothing. She made herself a cup of tea and left. 20 minutes later, Colin came downstairs. He stood in the doorway. He didn't sit. He told me Shawna's creditors were escalating. There had been a judgment. Their options were limited. They needed a significant asset to leverage, a home equity loan against the house. All I would have to do was co-sign. It would be in all of our names. He said this like it was reasonable, like it made sense for me to take on $280,000 in debt for a woman who had moved my reading chair into a corner and never once said thank you. I asked him what happened if they couldn't repay it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said the bank would have a claim on the property, but that was a worst-case scenario, and he wasn't going to think that way. I said, "This is my house, Colin." He said, "It's our home, Mum. There's a difference." I had heard Shawna's voice in that sentence as clearly as if she had spoken it herself. He told me I had until the end of the month, 30 days to decide. And then he refilled his coffee and went back upstairs, and I sat at my kitchen table in my house that I had lived in for 31 years, and I listened to the sound of his footsteps above my head, and I thought about what Gerald had said. Keep the house. It's yours. Don't let anyone talk you out of it. That afternoon, I called a real estate attorney in Nashville named Patricia Gaines. I had found her 6 months earlier, during a night when I couldn't sleep, and found myself searching terms I didn't want to be searching. Can family member force you to sell your home? What rights do homeowners have if adult child threatens eviction? How to protect property from son's spouse debt. I had not done anything with her number. I had saved it in my phone under P. Gaines, the way you save an emergency contact you hope you never need. I needed it. We spoke for 45 minutes. She was direct. She did not sugarcoat. She told me that no one could force me to use my house as collateral, that the property was mine, the decision was mine, and that what Colin had described was a form of financial coercion. She told me what my options were. She used words like revocable living trust and designated beneficiary and right of survivorship. She walked me through each one patiently. I took notes on a yellow legal pad the way I used to when I was still teaching 3rd grade at Rossview Elementary. Before I hung up, I asked her one more question. I asked her what would happen if I wanted to sell the house. She said, if it's in your name and your name alone, you can sell it whenever you choose. You are under no obligation to notify occupants beyond standard Tennessee landlord-tenant notice requirements. And since this is owner-occupied, meaning you live there, those requirements are minimal. I thanked her. I sat with my legal pad for a long time after. I want to be clear about something because I think it matters. What I did next was not about revenge. It was not about punishing my son or hurting him or evening some kind of score. I have been angry at Colin, yes. I have cried about it, more times than I will admit here. I spent 2 evenings sitting at my kitchen table going through Gerald's old photographs and talking to him out loud like he could hear me, asking him what to do. What I decided was not about anger, it was about survival. I listed the house on a Tuesday. My realtor, a woman named Jo from the Keller Williams office on Highway 41A, had it under contract in 11 days. The offer came in at $335,000, nearly full asking price, from a family relocating from Ohio. Cash offer, quick close, 45 days. I had not told Colin. I had not told Shawna. I had, in those same 45 days, done several other things quietly and without announcement. I had opened a new individual bank account at a credit union in Nashville, not the joint checking account Colin and I had shared for household expenses, which I closed with appropriate notice. I had spoken with my sister Paulette, who had a second bedroom in Louisville, and told me, without hesitation, that it had been waiting for me. I had arranged for a moving company. I had transferred Gerald's tools and his mother's china and everything in the sunroom and every African violet I owned into a storage unit I rented under my name alone. I gave notice to Colin and Shawna on a Wednesday morning, formal written notice, the way Patricia Gaines advised. I slipped the envelope under the bedroom door before they woke up. Then I made myself a cup of coffee and I sat in my reading chair, which I had moved back one final time, and I watched the sun come up over Gerald's yard. When Colin came downstairs, he had the letter in his hand. He asked me if this was a joke. I told him it was not. He said I couldn't do this. I said I could, and that I had. He said the buyers would back out. I told him the contract was signed and the earnest money had cleared. He stood there in the kitchen, and for the first time in a long time he looked like my son. Not the man who had stood in that same doorway and told me to sign my house away. He looked young. He looked scared. I felt something move in my chest that I won't call guilt because it wasn't guilt. It was grief. There is a difference. Guilt says you did something wrong. Grief says you lost something real. I had lost my son somewhere, and I was not sure when it happened. I suspected it had been gradual. I suspected Shawna had helped with that, though I know it is too easy to blame her for everything, and the truth is more complicated than that. Colin had made choices. He had stood in my kitchen and told me to co-sign my home into a debt that was not mine. He had done that. No one made him. Shawna came downstairs 10 minutes later. She read the letter standing in the hallway. Then she looked at me with an expression I had not seen from her before. Not anger, not contempt, something that might have been, if I'm being generous, recognition. She said, "You planned this." I said, "I protect what's mine." She didn't say anything after that. They had 30 days per the notice and they left in 22. I don't know where they went. Colin sent me a text message the night before they moved out. It said, "I hope you know what you've done to this family." I read it. I held it. I set the phone down on the kitchen counter and I didn't reply. There are things I could have said. I chose not to. The closing was on a Thursday in October. I sat across from the buyers, a young couple from Columbus with 2 kids and a dog named Biscuit they told me about while we were waiting for the title company to pull up the paperwork. They were excited. The wife said she loved the light in the sunroom. I told her it was best in the mornings. I signed my name, the house transferred. I cried in the parking lot afterward, not from regret, from something I don't have a clean word for. The end of a chapter, maybe, the end of the house. 31 years. Gerald's voice in my head, clear as anything, keep the house. And then you did, right up until the end. You kept it. I drove to Louisville that evening. Paulette had made pot roast. She had put fresh flowers on the dresser in the guest room, my room now for as long as I needed it. We sat at her kitchen table and we ate, and I told her everything, and she listened without interrupting, which is the greatest gift a sister can give. When I finished, she poured us both a small glass of wine, and she said, "Gerald would be proud of you." I think he would. I hope he would. I have not heard from Colin since the text message. That has been 4 months now. I will not pretend it doesn't hurt. It hurts the way that chronic things hurt, not sharply, not suddenly, but present, something you learn to carry differently over time. My sister thinks he will come around. She says his kind of stubbornness always peaks before it breaks. She may be right. She usually is. What I know is this. I spent 3 decades building something, a home, a marriage, a life. I taught children to read for 27 years. I raised my son with as much love as I knew how to give. I took care of my husband until there was no more taking care to be done. And then I sat quietly in half my own house for 2 years while someone rearranged my furniture and moved my chair into a corner and spoke to me like I was an inconvenience in a space I owned outright. I will not do that again. Whatever happens next, whether Colin finds his way back or doesn't, whether Shawna ever reckons with what she cost people, whether this grief softens into something manageable, I know one thing about myself now that I did not fully know before. I am not someone who disappears quietly. I am someone who plans. And I will always, in the end, protect what is mine. There's a moment, somewhere in the middle of all of this, that I keep coming back to. It's not the closing. It's not the morning Colin stood in my kitchen with that letter in his hand. It's earlier than that. It's the afternoon I moved my reading chair back for what I knew would be the last time, and I sat in it, and I looked out at Gerald's yard, and I thought, I know exactly what I'm going to do. That clarity didn't come from nowhere. It came from paying attention for 63 years to the difference between what people say and what they mean. It came from understanding that the world doesn't balance itself out by accident. Actions accumulate. Choices compound. What Colin and Shawna built together. The slow erosion, the rearranged furniture, the ultimatum delivered over morning coffee. That was a structure they had been constructing for years. And structures, eventually, bear weight. I think about the African violet I'd kept on that windowsill since 1997. It survived 3 repottings, 2 hard winters, and the year Gerald was sick, and I forgot to water anything for 6 weeks. It survived because it was rooted in the right soil and left in the right light. The moment Shawna moved it to the floor, it wasn't just a plant she displaced. It was a declaration. And declarations have consequences. What I did, the attorney, the listing, the quiet 45 days, none of that required cleverness so much as it required honesty. Honesty with myself about what was actually happening. That is harder than it sounds. It is much easier to call things by softer names. To say tension instead of coercion. To say adjustment period instead of I have been pushed out of half my own home. The moment I let myself use the accurate words, the path forward became visible. I taught 3rd grade for 27 years. I spent a long time thinking about what children need in order to become people who do right by others and by themselves. What I kept coming back to, year after year, was this. It was never enough to be kind if you didn't also think clearly. And it was never enough to think clearly if you didn't also have the spine to act on what you understood. You needed all 3, the moral compass, the working mind, and the willingness to hold your ground when everything in you wants to just keep the peace. Colin had kindness once. I believe that. Somewhere under everything Shawna brought into that house, there is still the boy who used to mow Gerald's lawn without being asked. Whether he finds his way back to himself is not something I can control. That is his work to do. My work was to survive with my integrity intact, to not become someone who signs away what she spent a lifetime building because she was too tired or too lonely or too afraid of conflict to say no. I did not do that. I am not sure I fully understood what that meant until I sat in that title company office and signed my name, and the house transferred, and it was done. I cried in the parking lot. I drove to Louisville. Paulette had made pot roast. Life continues. It just does. And what you carry forward into it, whether that's bitterness or clarity, whether you leave with your sense of yourself intact or in pieces, that part is up to you. I carried Gerald's voice. Keep the house. And I did, right up until the moment keeping it meant giving it away on my own terms. That, I think, is enough.